All right, motherfuckers, it's the hater back again. We're gonna talk about video games for a little bit. That's right, we're back. Hater gaming in the house, you know what I'm saying? First of all, I'd like to start by saying that I'm a big fan of the first Spider-Man game that they made for PS4 like last year or some shit. I thought it was great. I don't even like Spider-Man that much, if I'm being honest, but I thought the game was fantastic because it made you feel like Spider-Man, right? And it did a lot, it added a lot of things. Now, needless to say, I was very excited when they introduced, or announced, I should say, the sequel, Spider-Man Miles Morales, where you play as the new Spider-Man, Miles Morales, right? But I got the game, and I started playing it, and the game is garbage. Right? It's complete shit. Let me explain why it's complete shit. Not because the game itself is bad, because the game is virtually identical to the Spider-Man game from before. So it's pretty good as a game. If they released this game instead of last year's Spider-Man, it would be a fantastic game. One of the best games of the year for sure. But because it's the same exact game, right, as the one from last year, I cannot like it as much as I would. You know what I'm saying? A lot of people are already losing their minds over this game, right? Oh, you get to play as Miles. You know what I'm saying? Oh, Childish Gambino should have played him in a movie. Who gives a fuck? Who the fuck is Miles, first of all right? Now, I don't read the comic books. I know there's a new Spider-Man called Miles. I keep hearing different news about him from different friends of mine. One of my friends said he was gay or something, which is cool. It is what it is, you know what I'm saying? But Miles is like a new Spider-Man, right? So, this was my first real introduction to Miles as a character, aside from the last Spider-Man game where Miles is like a sidekick kind of. He helps Peter Parker do a bunch of things. You know what I mean? And I actually found the Miles missions and the MJ missions to be kind of interesting, like deviations of the game. Right? It was like, oh, you're playing as Spider-Man, but it's like, whoa, now we're gonna see like what these people are seeing that aren't Spider-Man. Right? It just adds a little bit of perspective. Now, they weren't the most entertaining parts of the game because obviously you want to play as Spider-Man, right? But they were interesting enough, right? And that was really my first introduction into the character of Miles Morales, as well as his father, Jefferson Davis, you know what I'm saying? Which I thought were both very good characters, especially Jefferson. I thought he was great. That mission where you're Spider-Man and you're working together with Jefferson, for anyone that's played the game, it was a great mission, like when Jefferson saved Spider-Man, it was sick, And then you realize, like the casual fan that I am, you realize, oh, this is the father of Miles Morales, right? Who is like who's gonna be the new Spider-Man. Like, I knew that, even though he wasn't yet until the end of the game. But so I was kind of looking forward to this, right? I was kind of looking forward to it. I'm not gonna lie. But here's the problem, right? Now I haven't beaten the game. I played it for a few hours last night when it came out, at midnight. So I haven't beaten the game. So maybe the game gets much better, right? But from what I've seen thus far, right? I've done a few story missions and a few side quests. What I've seen thus far, the game is complete shit, and here's why, right? All they're doing is taking a character, right, called Miles, and doing the same thing with him that they did with Peter Parker, right? The only way this game sells, or no, the game sells no matter what, but the only way you can justify this game is by making Miles Morales the main character, right? Because you don't have to work hard to come up with a better story. All you got to do is just do another origin, like coming of age type situation where Miles is like, oh, I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to be Spider-Man. Oh, I'm insecure. Like all this stupid shit. We've seen that before, right? And we saw it with the last game with Peter Parker. Not the insecure part, but the whole like Spider-Man is doing Spider-Man things, In the first game, because it was the first game, you had to learn all these cool things, right? It's like you can run up walls instead of just normally climbing up the walls. You can run up walls, you can swing, you can dive, you can zip through, you can do all these cool things that like when you pick up the game, you're like, oh wow, this is awesome. Like I can do so many things here to like get around the city, Now it's the exact same things. I mean, I'm sure they've added a thing here and there, right? That I haven't, discovered yet. But thus far, it's the same exact game, right? The only difference is that they've taken Peter Parker, which actually is cool, and replaced him with Miles, who, I don't know what happened from the first game to the second game, but this Miles is like a different Miles. First of all, they changed the Peter Parker model for no reason whatsoever, right? It's like, it's a make-believe character, you can just use the likeness that you used in the last game, right? But I guess maybe like the guy who they based it on, like they didn't pay him. I don't fuck knows, right? Point is, all of a sudden now it's like a new Peter Parker model, and I'm like, what the hell is this shit? You know what I'm saying? What the fuck is this? Like, why'd you do this to me, right? Then Peter Parker goes on vacation, so automatically the game takes this like lighter tone, you know what I mean? Like it feels like a DLC. It's like, oh, well, what would happen if Peter Parker went on vacation? Miles would take over on a much lesser threat. You know what I mean? It has this like this sort of Damocles is kind of dangling over it storyline wise, where it's like, oh, Peter left. Like this would be a non-issue if Peter was here, but because like this new Spider-Man is like an inexperienced novice, right, who's inferior to Peter Parker, he now has to like, pick up the slack, and can he do it, right? Which would be fine and dandy, right? Except for the character is not interesting, right? It's the same character as Peter Parker. This is the same thing I say about like wrestling when I talk about wrestling in the wrestling videos, right? It's the same exact character, It's like Miles is like, he wants to be Peter Parker, right? Like that's like the story of the game. He wants to be Spider-Man, so he copies Peter Parker. He does the same kind of quips, he makes the same like shitty puns, except it's not endearing when you're copying someone. It's cool when Spider-Man does it because it's like part of his character. It's part of like his personality, But like this new Spider-Man has the same personality as the old Spider-Man, right? So it makes the game, it pulls you out of the game. Like I was playing the game, doing side missions. So like, there weren't any moments where like I realized that it was Miles, you know what I'm saying? Where the game didn't necessarily remind me that it's a new Spider-Man because I'm out there like, breaking up fights and, arresting motherfucks, hitting them with webs, right? But like, well, after doing that for 30, 40 minutes, I started forgetting that this is a different game. I'm like, oh, this is the same game as last year. I'm Peter Parker. I forgot that I'm Miles, right? Because the personalities are completely the same. It's like the same exact thing, If you're going to introduce a new character, right, especially to fill the shoes of a beloved older character, you have to make them different. Otherwise, what's the point? Here's the problem, right? Here's the problem. A lot of people were excited that, oh, it's like now you get to play as the Black and Hispanic Spider-Man, which is cool. I get that, motherfucks. I mean, I think it's insane that some people want characters on TV to reflect who they themselves are. I think that's fucking weird as shit, if you ask me. You know what I'm saying? People that want to see themselves represented on TV are strange, in my opinion. That's fucking weird. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of these people say this. A lot of people, it was the same problem with Last of Us 2. People were like, oh, this group isn't represented on video games. So what? It's not a census. It's a video game. You know what I'm saying? It's a make-believe story about a guy who dresses as a spider. So in this weird situation that people find themselves in, where they want to see themselves on the screen, like they want to feel like, well, if I want to be Spider-Man, I could do it too. No, you can't, retard, because it's not a real thing. You know what I mean? But fine. All right, let's go with that, right? A lot of people were excited that Spider-Man is Hispanic and Black. Cool, good for them. I ain't got no worries. You know what I'm saying? But here's the problem with that, right? You would expect that because now he's a new character, he would have a personality that's a bit different, right? Otherwise, all you've done is just taken, you might as well just take Peter Parker and just make him Black and Hispanic and be like, oh, this is Peter Parker. He's Black and Hispanic now. You know what I mean? It's the same personality. The whole concept is to create a new character. You have the opportunity to do so, to create a new established character. Now, I know some people are probably listening and thinking, well, hater, you didn't read like comic book edition 1573 or whatever, right? Where Miles' like personality is, thrown at you and you learn a lot about him. And I'm sure that's true. I'm talking strictly about the game. This feels exactly the same thing. Instead of Aunt May, you have Miles' mom, and that's the only thing. And then like, instead of like the Watanabe girl, whatever the fuck her name was for the first game, now you have like his friend or maybe lover. I don't know what it is anymore. His like Genki or whatever, right? You have that guy, right? It's the same exact game, right? Which brings me to the biggest problem of all, right? The people that made the game, Insomniac, have taken advantage, right, of the fact that some people are going to want to play as Miles Morales. They've taken advantage of the fact that PS5 is coming out today, apparently, right? They've taken advantage to release a new game, right? It's basically the same thing as the last game, but to release a game that they know people are going to buy, right? This has DLC written all over it. This would have been a very successful DLC. You could have charged $50 even, which is what the game costs, right? And called it a DLC, but don't pretend that this is like a full game, Now, the game might be long. I haven't beaten it yet, of course, but I did play for a couple hours and it said I was 15 or 16% done, And like, I know you don't need to do 100% to beat the game, It's like, I think if you beat like 65% of it, if you ignore some of the shit, you're pretty much unfinished the story, right? So I don't know anything about that. All I know is that the game feels exactly the same. They've taken away some of Peter Parker's gadgets. They've added some new shit, but they've taken away a lot of things that were cool, right? And just the fact that you lose that novelty of the game where you're like, oh man, I'm playing a Spider-Man game, right? It really put things into perspective for me, you know? It's the same thing that I said about Last of Us 2, right? A lot of people were pissed off at the SJW agenda, which I don't give a shit about. I care about the fact that Last of Us 2 made absolutely no innovations on Last of Us 1. They didn't even add like a new weapon, you know what I'm saying? Like, they didn't even add one thing that you could do in this one that you couldn't do in the last one. As far as I can remember, perhaps like swimming or something, I don't know. But the point I'm trying to make is this. Like, when we as the fans demand more games, like I'm looking forward to what's it called? Final Fantasy 16, obviously, right? But I know that Final Fantasy 16 is going to be completely different from Final Fantasy 15 and from 7 Remake, right? It's going to be a different game, right? Because Japanese people, for some reason, understand this. They understand that you can't get away with just doing the same shit again and calling it something else. Oh, here's the same Spider-Man game. You know, oh, but it's Miles Morales. Who gives a fuck who it is? He's wearing a mask for 90% of the game anyways, right? So that's what I'm getting at. You know what I'm saying? So this is the reason why I believe that Spider-Man Miles Morales absolutely sucks. You know, like this game, like as a standalone title, it's a good game, right? But if, for example, you're going to give Spider-Man 1 95%, or whatever score it got, let's say 95 for the sake of argument, this game deserves 70. You know what I mean? Because it has added nothing, right? It needs points detracted from it because of the fact that it did not do anything innovative. And now, this brings me to my last point, which one can argue is also the main point of this video. All right? This is very important. I typically don't do these kind of things. You know what I mean? I don't really go around talking about random-ass things, but I feel like I have to right now. You know what I mean? There's an article that I read that I will link in the description, right? This article was written by some broad on Time magazine, right? I don't even know where to begin with this one. The article was written by this woman. It's completely insane. Like, this is what's wrong with America today, probably, right? The fact that people like this person who work for Time magazine, people that have absolutely zero abilities to do any kind of creative thinking or any kind of like critical thinking as well. You know what I mean? It really is problematic if you ask me, you know? So this broad, whose name is, I can't find her name, whatever. The article essentially talks about, what's it called? About how Spider-Man, Miles Morales, could have taken the opportunity to talk about police reform, right? But instead, they didn't, right? I believe that this, I'm not going to link it anymore because the article's title has changed, which is disingenuous, because the title has now become less like crazy. But this woman basically argues that because Miles Morales is like black and Hispanic, right, that the game should have taken an opportunity to discuss police violence, right? And one of the things in the article that I believe it said was something like, in the first Spider-Man game, Peter Parker talks to the cops, right? Which is wrong. He gets information from like police dispatchers, like he's like hacked into the system. But he talks to the one cop who's like his personal ally, right? And he talks to Jefferson Davis, but that's a different story, right? So this woman explains how like Peter Parker can talk to the cops because Peter Parker is white, right? But the people at Insomniac Games understood that because, according to her, not me, right? That because Miles Morales is not white, his relationship with the cops is going to be different, right? Now, let's take a moment and understand how insane that is. First of all, we're talking about, number one, make-believe characters, all right? Two, these are superheroes who have secret identities, right? In the mythos, in the lore of Spider-Man, people don't know that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, right? They don't know that Miles Morales is Spider-Man, the second one, right? Nobody knows what color their skin is. Now, you might see Spider-Man taking off part of his mask, and you can see that he's white in some of the movies and things like that. But in the context of the movie and the media franchise, people don't know who it is, right? They don't know who Peter Parker is. They don't know Spider-Man, right? So the idea that somehow cops would be more willing to talk to Spider-Man 1 because he's white is insane. And I don't mean insane like it's crazy to like make that stretch. I mean like it is insane. Like it is clinically retarded. Like whoever wrote this article needs to like really, really reconsider their critical thinking abilities, right? This is another reason why the game sucks. Because just like any other big game now, the SJW agenda must be, for some reason, like intertwined with the game's narrative, right? Like, why the hell would anyone expect Spider-Man Miles Morales, the video game, to tackle police reform Why would a game talk about police reform? You're playing a children's game with a guy who dresses up as a spider and swings around the city making bad puns. That's what the game is. The game is not, let's talk about police reform. This is the equivalent of me demanding that Final Fantasy 16 could, if they chose to, could talk about, I don't know, the difference between Domino's and Pizza Hut and which one they think is better, right? Final Fantasy 16 could have taken the opportunity to discuss whether Domino's is better than Pizza Hut. It is insane to expect games to do your bidding, right? The game isn't there to make a point. The game is there to entertain me, you know? And any kind of situation where like a game would be like, oh, the police reform, this police reform, that, the game isn't about cops. Like you might make this argument, and it might be a very decent argument if you made a game about like a cop that's corrupt, right? Where it's like, you're like Max Payne, right? Where you're like a cop, I think he's a cop, right? Where you're kind of like a vigilante, and you're like, oh man, like, and then, you know, in the side game, in the side quest, there could be something there that's like, oh, like police brutality, this, you know, just to keep it like relevant, not to make a point, right? These people are not very, very smart. It's as simple as that. You know, these people, like the standard to be a journalist right now, in my opinion at least, maybe she is very smart. In my opinion, she seems like an idiot, right? The standard to be a journalist is incredibly low. If any of you want to be a journalist, you can probably just do it. Within 2 weeks, you'll be working for Time. You know what I'm saying? That's what I gotta say about that. So, in summation, Miles Morales, the game sucks ass. Miles Morales, the character of this game, sucks ass, as opposed to the Miles Morales from Spider-Man, the first game, which was actually a bit more fleshed out and seemed more mature and less like goofy and less childish, you know? This guy is basically another Peter Parker, you know, maybe something happens. But we'll see, right? The game, if you like the first Spider-Man game, you should play this one because it's, you know, the same exact game, right? And there's just more of that game, so that's pretty fun. But if you didn't, obviously you have absolutely zero reason to get this game. And if you thought it was okay, you really shouldn't spend your money on it. You should spend your money on something else and just play the first Spider-Man again because you're not going to get anything new from this, motherfuckers.